The rain tapped against the cracked window like restless fingers, steady and relentless, a rhythm that filled the silence of the tiny room. The ceiling leaked in 2 places, and the sound of dripping water mixed with the shallow breathing of a child asleep on a pile of old blankets. The little girl lay next to him, her small body curled protectively around her younger brother, trying to shield him from the cold that seeped through every broken wall. She was only 8 years old, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived decades of hardship. They were wide and glassy, reflecting a childhood robbed of safety, robbed of tenderness. Her brother was barely 5, his tiny hands clutching at her dress as if letting go meant being swallowed by the night itself. The house wasn't a home. It was a prison of shadows, ruled by a man whose footsteps meant fear, whose voice meant pain. Their stepfather had left hours earlier, slamming the door and promising to return drunk. The girl knew what that meant. She knew what bruises looked like in the morning light, knew how her brother's body trembled whenever the door creaked open. The room smelled of damp clothes and old cigarettes. The air was heavy, suffocating. She pressed her lips together, as if silence could build an invisible wall around them. She wanted to be strong. But when her brother stirred, his small stomach growling in hunger, his lips quivering with a whimper, something inside her broke. And in that moment, barely audible, carried away with the sound of rain and wind, she whispered the words she had never dared to say aloud. "Please, save us." It wasn't meant for anyone. Not for the walls. Not for the world. It was a prayer she didn't know how to pray, a cry too fragile to carry any hope. But outside, under the dim streetlight, there was someone listening. A man, tall, shoulders hunched under the weight of years of regret, was passing by the narrow alley. He had walked this neighborhood countless times, searching for something he had lost long ago. Searching for someone. The rain had soaked his coat, and his face was marked with fatigue and sorrow. When the whisper reached him, faint, fragile, like the last breath of a candle flame, he froze. The voice, it was the voice of a child. He turned his head toward the house. Broken shutters. A window with glass missing. A flicker of movement inside. And then he heard it again, not as words, but as a plea that struck his chest like lightning. His heart pounded. His throat tightened. For years he had lived with questions, with the ache of not knowing. He had been told lies, that the child did not exist, that it was all in the past. But a father knows. Deep in his soul, a father knows. And in that second, as the rain poured harder, he understood, that whisper belonged to his daughter. Inside, the little girl held her brother tighter. She thought the night had swallowed her words, thought no one would ever hear. But her whisper had already set something in motion, a chain of events that would soon shatter the walls of cruelty around her. The man outside clenched his fists, fighting the storm of emotions raging inside him. Regret, anger, fear, and a love he had buried deep but never extinguished. He knew this was the moment he could no longer remain in the shadows. He had found them. The girl, unaware of the eyes watching from the dark, closed her eyes and kissed her brother's forehead. She whispered again, softer this time, almost to herself. "Please, save us." And though she didn't know it yet, the universe had already answered. If this opening touched your heart, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and let others feel the power of this story too. Every reaction keeps stories like this alive. The next morning carried no warmth. The clouds still hung low, heavy with rain, and the weak sunlight that filtered through the cracked walls only revealed the poverty and despair that clung to the house. The little girl sat on the floor beside her brother, brushing the dust from his hair with trembling fingers. He stirred awake, his face pale and his lips dry. There was no breakfast waiting. There rarely was. Their stepfather had returned late in the night, his boots pounding against the wooden boards, his voice slurred with alcohol. He had cursed them for existing, for breathing air he believed belonged only to him. He had thrown an empty bottle against the wall, the glass shattering inches from the girl's head. She had pulled her brother close, shielding him with her body, waiting until the storm of his rage faded into drunken snores. Now, as the morning dragged itself in, the girl's stomach ached with hunger. But she pushed the feeling aside, focusing on her brother. "It's okay," she whispered, forcing a smile. "We'll be okay." She said it for him, though deep inside, she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. In the streets outside, life moved on as if nothing was wrong. Vendors shouted their prices, neighbors exchanged gossip, children ran after a ball. Yet in that little room, silence clung like chains. The girl had become used to invisibility. She had learned long ago that nobody saw, and nobody came. But she was wrong. The man who had paused under the rain the night before was still there, watching from a distance. He hadn't slept. His mind replayed that faint whisper over and over, tearing through every barrier he had built. He had wandered through this city for years, driven by rumors and hope, chasing pieces of a past he was never allowed to hold. Now, he felt closer than ever. Her face, he had seen a glimpse through the broken window. Those eyes. They weren't just the eyes of a stranger. They were his. The same shape, the same fire, only clouded by suffering. He pressed his hand to his chest, steadying the storm inside. Memories flooded back, the woman he had loved, the child he was told never survived, the lies he swallowed because he had no proof. He had blamed himself for years, drowning in guilt. But now, staring at the fragile figure of the little girl through the cracks of a ruined home, he knew. The truth had been hidden from him, but it had survived, in her. Inside, the girl and her brother tried to make sense of their world. Hunger gnawed at them, but it wasn't just food they longed for. It was kindness. Safety. A gentle hand instead of a fist. The girl carried the weight of both their lives on her small shoulders, making decisions no child should make. She had tried once to ask the neighbors for help. But when her stepfather found out, the punishment was so brutal she swore never to risk it again. The neighbors heard, of course, the yelling, the crashes, the cries. But they turned their faces away. Nobody wanted trouble. So she had learned to stay quiet. To protect her brother the only way she could, by absorbing the pain herself. That morning, her stepfather stumbled out of his room, eyes bloodshot, rage simmering just beneath the surface. He barked at them to clean, to fetch water, to disappear from his sight. When her brother tripped over a chair and spilled the little water they had, the man's hand flew across his cheek. The girl's heart nearly stopped. She rushed forward, standing between the man and her brother, her thin arms spread wide like fragile wings. "Don't touch him," she cried. The man sneered, his breath sour with liquor. He laughed at her defiance, the laugh of someone who enjoyed crushing the small sparks of resistance. "Or what?" he spat. "You'll stop me?" Her body trembled, but her eyes held steady. For the first time, she didn't look away. For the first time, she let the fire inside her burn. The man raised his hand again, but before it could fall, there was a sound outside, a heavy knock at the door. Both froze. The girl's breath caught. The stepfather scowled, muttering curses, and staggered to the door. He yanked it open, ready to lash out at whoever dared interrupt him. And there, standing tall despite the rain-soaked clothes, was the man from the street. For a moment, silence pressed in. The stepfather blinked, confused by the stranger's piercing gaze. The girl, peeking from behind, felt her chest tighten. She didn't know who he was, but something about the way he looked at her, not with disgust, not with cruelty, but with recognition, made her heart stutter. The man at the door clenched his jaw. His voice was calm, but it carried steel. "I heard a child crying." The stepfather scoffed, trying to block the doorway. "You heard wrong. Get lost." But the man didn't move. His eyes remained locked on the girl's. And in that locked gaze, she felt something she had never felt before, the possibility that someone had finally heard her whisper. The stepfather cursed again and shoved the door closed. But the girl knew, deep inside, that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The day dragged on, heavy and suffocating. The stepfather had locked himself in his room after slamming the door on the mysterious man, muttering threats under his breath. The little girl sat by the broken window, her arms wrapped tightly around her brother, who still whimpered softly from the slap he had received earlier. She tried to comfort him with stories, half-imagined fairy tales whispered into his ear, but even as she spoke, her eyes kept drifting to the door. Who was that man? Why had he looked at her that way, as if he knew her? His eyes had not been filled with cruelty. They had not been filled with pity either. They had been filled with recognition, as though he had been searching for her all his life. The thought unsettled her, but also, strangely, gave her a glimmer of warmth she had almost forgotten existed. Outside, the man hadn't gone far. He had stepped back into the alley, his fists clenched, his breath uneven. Every fiber of his being screamed to storm into the house and drag the children out, but he knew it wasn't that simple. He had seen enough, the bruises, the fear in the girl's eyes, the violence simmering inside the man who called himself their guardian. He needed proof. He needed a way to act without losing them again. The hours crawled. By evening, the stepfather emerged, his face red with drink. He barked at the children to fetch him more, tossing a few coins onto the ground. The little boy shrank back, but the girl picked them up silently. She knew resistance only brought pain. Go, the man growled. And hurry. The girl took her brother's hand and led him out into the wet streets. The sky was still heavy with storm clouds, and puddles reflected the dim light of the lamps. She kept her head down, hoping no one would notice the fresh marks on her brother's face, or the shadows under her own eyes. But someone noticed. From across the street, the man watched, hidden beneath the awning of a shuttered shop. His chest ached as he saw the children shuffle toward the market. The sight confirmed everything he feared: they were living in misery, abandoned by everyone else. His jaw tightened. He couldn't let another day pass. Tonight, something would change. When the girl reached the market, she bought what little bread the coins could afford. She tore a piece for her brother, watching him devour it hungrily. She gave him the last bite, ignoring her own hunger, just as she always did. The man watching from the shadows felt a surge of both pride and sorrow. Pride for her strength. Sorrow that a child had to carry such weight. The walk back was slower. The boy grew tired, and the girl lifted him onto her back, staggering under the small burden. Her thin frame bent, but her spirit refused to break. And that was when it happened. As they reached the broken door of the house, the stepfather was already waiting. His eyes were bloodshot, his fists clenched. "Took you long enough," he snarled, snatching the bread from her hands. He shoved her aside, tearing into it greedily before tossing crumbs at the boy. The girl tried to steady her brother, but the man's hand came down again, striking her cheek. The boy screamed, and she fell to her knees, holding back tears. And then the door burst open. The stranger stepped inside, his tall figure filling the room. His voice was low, but it carried the force of a storm. "Enough." The stepfather turned, startled, then sneered. "You again? Didn't I tell you to get lost?" The man didn't flinch. His eyes burned with fury as he looked at the bruises, the fear, the trembling children pressed against the wall. He took a step forward, his presence commanding, immovable. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Not without them." The girl's breath caught. She stared at him, wide-eyed, her heart thundering. The words sounded impossible, unreal, as if someone had finally spoken the promise she had been begging for all along. The stepfather laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "They're mine. You've got no right." The man's voice cracked like thunder. "I am her father." Silence. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The stepfather's face twisted in shock, then rage. He lunged forward, shoving the man in the chest, but the stranger didn't budge. He stood firm, his jaw set, his fists trembling not with fear, but with the need to protect. The girl gasped. Her father. Could it be true? She had never seen this man before, but something deep inside her stirred, something she couldn't explain. The shape of his eyes. The way his voice softened when he looked at her. The way he seemed to know her even without words. The the stepfather roared, grabbing a bottle from the table and hurling it across the room. It shattered against the wall, glass scattering near the children. The girl screamed, pulling her brother into her arms. The man moved like lightning. He seized the stepfather's arm, twisting it until the bottle slipped from his grasp. Their eyes locked, fury meeting fury. But there was something the drunkard didn't understand. This wasn't just a fight. This was a father reclaiming what had been stolen. The children clung to each other, trembling, as the chaos unfolded. For the first time, the girl dared to hope. For the first time, she believed her whispered plea had been heard. And she was right. The room smelled of spilled liquor and wet dust. Shards of glass glittered like cold stars across the floor where the bottle had exploded. The little girl tightened her arms around her brother, tucking his head beneath her chin. The stranger, no, the man who had called himself her father, stood between them and the stepfather, broad-shouldered, unflinching, the rain-soaked coat clinging to him like armor. "Get out," the stepfather hissed, clutching his twisted wrist. "You don't belong here." The man didn't move. His voice was quiet, but it carried a gravity that seemed to steady the very air. "I do. And I'm not leaving without them." The stepfather barked a laugh, but it lost power the moment those words rolled out. "I am her father." He sneered to cover the tremor. "Prove it." The man reached inside his coat with slow, deliberate motion, keeping his eyes on the drunkard the whole time. He withdrew a sealed envelope, the edges rain-softened but still intact, in a worn leather wallet. He placed them gently on the table, sweeping aside a ring of beer. "There are records," he said. "Birth registrations. Hospital forms. Her mother's letters, some I never saw until recently. And there's this." He pulled out a photograph. Its corners were frayed, the color faded. In it, a younger version of the man stood with a woman under a summer sky. The girl didn't know the man, but she knew the woman. The line of the cheek, the half-smile like a secret, her mother, younger and alight with hope. The stepfather's jaw clenched. "Forged," he said, too quickly. "All of it." The man's gaze hardened. "I wish it were. I wish the last 8 years were a lie I could crumple and throw away. But the truth has teeth." The house seemed to hold its breath. "Lies are easy to tell when people want to believe them," the man continued. "When families pressure you to disappear, when fear does the rest. I wanted to stay. I tried. Your threats took care of the rest." The stepfather flinched, as though struck. A flicker of panic skittered across his face. "You don't know anything about this house." "Not enough," the man said. "But I know enough to call the police." He turned his head slightly toward the door, just enough for the children to see the outline of a phone in his hand. The girl's heart jumped. She had learned to fear loud voices, threats, boots stomping toward the door. But this felt different. Like a door opening, not slamming shut. "You won't," the stepfather said, bluffing, eyes darting. "No one will believe you." "They don't have to believe me," the man replied. "They'll believe the bruises. The neighbors heard. The teachers noticed when they used to show up at school. They'll believe the doctor. And they'll believe the letters." He unfolded one with careful fingers. The paper crackled like thin ice. The girl strained to read the broken lines. "If anything happens to me, tell him she has his eyes." Her throat tightened. Heat rose behind her eyes until everything blurred. She had spent years pretending the past was a locked box, heavy, rusted, unreachable. Now it was opening, not with a tidy click, but with the wrenching screech of metal that had been forced shut by someone else's hands. The stepfather cursed. "You think you can waltz in here with old paper and take what's mine?" The word mine made the man's jaw go granite. "They are not objects. They are children." He shifted his weight, and the room registered the difference, a man rooted. "You will not touch them again." There was a sound outside. Not thunder, tires against wet gravel. The stepfather's head whipped toward the door. The man didn't look away. "You called them?" the drunkard growled. Hours ago, the man said. I needed them to see you as you are. The door opened, and the night breathed in a wash of cold air. 2 officers stepped across the threshold. Their uniforms looked impossibly clean in the dirty room. The first took in the scene with a single, sweeping glance: the bottles, the glass, the small bodies pressed into the wall, the man blocking the drunkard's path with the steadiness of a final verdict. The stepfather blustered, "This is my house. They're children," the officer said, the same word, the same gravity. "Step aside." The drunkard reached for another bottle, a hand caught his wrist. The second officer moved with practiced efficiency, slipping metal around the rage and clicking it shut. The sound was small, but it left an echo. The girl's brother whimpered into her dress. She pressed her lips to his hair. The world tilted, not with fear this time, but with the dizzying relief of a held breath finally releasing. The officers separated space into safety. One knelt by the children, voice soft, careful. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Can you stand?" His eyes flicked to the purpling mark on the boy's cheek. His jaw tightened. The girl found her voice somewhere deep in the tangle of panic and hope. "He hit us," she said. It came out small, but it did not break. He breaks things. He shouts. He locks the door." The officer nodded, not just to her but as if to the room itself, the evidence painted in dust and broken glass. "Thank you," he said, as if her words were a key. They moved in steps that felt ceremonial, photographs taken, names recorded, the chain of custody for truth itself. The man offered the letters, the photograph, the birth record with a trembling steady hand. When the first officer asked his name, he spoke it as though setting a weight down at last. "Why now?" the officer asked gently, not accusatory, curious, human. "Because I heard her," the man said, glancing at the girl. "And I've been hearing her for 8 years, even when I didn't know how to find the sound." They didn't take the children far that night, just across the street, to a warm car and then to a station where the fluorescent lights made everyone look tired but alive. A social worker met them with a blanket that smelled like clean laundry. The boy fell asleep in seconds, thumb crooked at the corner of his mouth, small chest rising and falling with a rhythm that did not flinch at every door creak. The girl, though, she stayed awake. The man sat a chair away, as if he knew proximity could be too much when the world has always punished wanting. He folded his hands and stared at them the way some men stare at stained glass windows. As if light could pass through pain and make it holy. The social worker spoke gently, carefully, asking questions the girl had never been allowed to answer. How long had it been like this? Did she remember a time before? Did she have anything she wanted to bring from the house? The girl shook her head at the last question, then paused. "There's a box," she whispered. "Under the floorboard. I hid it, when Mom," her voice faltered. "It has a ribbon. And a picture." The man's eyes closed for a heartbeat. When he opened them, they shone. "A blue ribbon?" he asked softly. She nodded. The smallest nod, like a bird dipping its head to water. "I tied it," he said, voice rough with memory. On the day your mother told me your name." The girl looked at him then as if a veil had lifted and the lines of faces she'd seen all her life rearranged themselves into a map that finally made sense. The shape of his mouth. The way the corners of his eyes held grief like a secret. The tired hands that did not know how to rest but still tried to hold gentleness without breaking it. Something inside her recognized the geography of him. "Why didn't you come before?" she asked. It was an accusation. It was the innocent, brutal arithmetic of a child adding up missing days. "I did," he said. "But I knocked on the wrong doors. I believed the wrong people. I didn't have proof. And by the time I learned the truth, you were already hidden behind walls I couldn't see through. I wanted to tear them down with my hands. But I was afraid if I tried, I'd lose you for good." He swallowed. "I almost did." The social worker glanced between them, then stood. "We'll run the formal processes," she said gently. "Emergency protection first. Then we'll review the documents, contact the court in the morning. She looked at the girl. Tonight, you are safe. Safe. The word landed like a blanket on Winter's shoulders. They gave the children a small room with 2 cots and a mural of trees painted on the wall. The boy didn't stir. The girl lay down but could not bring herself to close her eyes. After a moment, there was a quiet knock at the open door. The man stood there, not crossing the threshold. "May I?" he began, then stopped. "Only if you want." She sat up, her feet dangling off the cot. She didn't know the rituals for this kind of meeting. There was no script for losing and finding across years. But she knew the sound of a voice that had held her, even when the body couldn't. It wasn't reason. It was recognition. "Come," she said. He stepped in and sank to one knee so they were eye level. Up close, the stubble on his chin looked like salt and pepper scattered on warm bread. His eyes were tired. They were also bright. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, weathered card, edges softened, corners bent. On it, written in a careful hand, was a name. Her name. The first time she had seen it written without anger. "I kept it," he said. "Every day." She reached out and touched the card with one finger, as if it might vanish. Then she did something she did not plan, something that surprised even her. She leaned forward and, very carefully, rested her forehead against his. It was not a hug. It was a bridge. He let out a breath that sounded like someone opening a window after years of stale air. His hand hovered, then, with a caution that honored all the broken things between them, he placed it lightly on her shoulder. "I heard you," he whispered, the words warming in the quiet room. "I won't stop hearing you again." Outside, the night softened. Somewhere, rain ticked itself into silence. The mural trees on the wall held their painted stillness, and for the first time in a long time, stillness did not mean fear. It meant room for tomorrow to knock and be allowed in. The truth, unburied, did not fix everything. It did something braver, it made space for everything to be fixed. Spring arrived quietly, like a gentle hand smoothing the rough edges of winter. Weeks had passed since the night everything changed, but for the little girl it felt like she had stepped into an entirely different world. The air smelled different now, not of mold and stale smoke, but of freshly baked bread, soap, and flowers that lined the windowsills of her new home. Her brother's laughter echoed through the house, bouncing off walls that had never known anger. He ran barefoot down the hallway, clutching a toy car given to him by one of the social workers, his small voice ringing with joy instead of fear. The sound was strange at first, unfamiliar to ears that had grown used to cries. But soon it became the melody of their mornings. The girl stood in the garden, her thin frame wrapped in a clean dress that actually fit her. The earth was damp beneath her shoes, and sunlight touched her face, warm and steady. She tilted her head back, eyes closed, breathing it all in, the smell of grass, the sound of birds, the sensation of being alive without dread. Behind her, the man watched. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a look of wonder etched into the lines of his face. He was still getting used to it himself, the sound of small footsteps running across hardwood floors, the sight of the girl's hair catching the light, the knowledge that after years of emptiness, he was no longer alone. "Are you cold?" he asked softly. She turned, her lips curving into a smile that still carried a trace of shyness. "No. It feels safe." Safe. The word tasted foreign, but beautiful, in her mouth. That night, after dinner at a real table with real plates, the children curled up on the couch. The man sat beside them, a photo album resting on his lap. He had been collecting pieces of their story, old pictures of their mother, documents, letters, piecing together a history that had once been torn apart. "This was her favorite dress," he said, pointing to a picture of the girl's mother, radiant in a yellow sundress. "She wore it the first day I met her. She laughed because I spilled coffee on my shirt." The girl leaned closer, her eyes wide, as if trying to memorize every detail. For years, memories of her mother had been scattered, fragile, sometimes blurred by grief. Now, those fragments were being stitched together, given color and shape. Her brother yawned, curling against her side. She smoothed his hair and whispered, "Sleep, it's okay now." And for the first time, she truly believed it. Later, when the children were tucked into bed, the man lingered at the doorway, watching them sleep. The girl's small hand rested protectively on her brother's chest, even in dreams. He felt tears prick his eyes. She had been a shield when no one else would be. She had whispered for salvation, not for herself alone, but for them both. He stepped outside into the garden, the night air cool against his skin. Above him, stars glittered across the sky, silent witnesses to the long years of searching and the miracle of finding. He closed his eyes and whispered a promise, "I heard you. And I will keep hearing you. Always." The next morning, the girl awoke to a smell that nearly made her cry: pancakes. Real pancakes, warm and sweet, stacked high on a plate. She sat at the table, blinking back tears as the man set the dish before her. He noticed and knelt down, brushing a thumb gently across her cheek. "No more hunger," he said. "Not here." The girl pressed her small hand against his. Words tangled in her throat, but she managed to whisper the phrase that had once been a prayer in the dark. "Please, save us." Only this time, it wasn't a plea. It was gratitude. He pulled her into his arms. She didn't flinch. She let herself sink into the warmth of him, her heart thudding against his chest like it had always belonged there. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. She felt chosen. And as the days turned into weeks, the house filled with life. Laughter replaced shouting. Comfort replaced fear. Love replaced silence. The little girl who had whispered into the rain was no longer just an orphan. She was a daughter. And she was home. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even in the darkest moments, whispers can be heard and answered, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Cryspire, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Every time you support us, you help us bring more stories of courage, pain, and redemption to life. Together, we keep these voices alive.